You believe writing a will is an act of responsibility, a final gesture of control, a way to protect the people you love. But here is the truth most people never hear. Your will can destroy your family faster than your death ever could. Money exposes people. Inheritance reveals character. And the moment you are gone, the rules you carefully wrote on paper begin colliding with human nature. Jealousy, resentment, old wounds that were never healed. A will doesn't just distribute wealth, it distributes emotion. And most people, without realizing it, plant the seeds of conflict inside the very document meant to prevent it. You think your children will respect your wishes. You assume your relatives will behave with dignity. You imagine gratitude. But death has a strange effect on people. Grief mixes with entitlement. Love mixes with competition. And suddenly your legacy becomes a battlefield. Most families don't break apart because of death. They break apart because of what follows it, because of decisions written in ink by someone who underestimated human nature. One of the first mistakes people make is using a will as a tool for revenge. It sounds harsh, but it happens more often than you think. A parent feels disappointed in one child. Maybe that child chose a different path. Maybe they argued too much. Maybe they didn't visit enough. So the parent writes something cruel into the will. They leave that child almost nothing, or they add a message meant to punish them. It feels satisfying while you're alive, like justice, like a final word. But after you're gone, that act of punishment doesn't teach a lesson. It creates a fracture. Your children stop seeing each other as family. They start seeing each other as competitors. Your will becomes evidence in emotional trials you will never witness. And the bitterness can last generations, because the truth is simple. Punishment from the grave is not wisdom. It is unresolved anger disguised as authority. Another mistake people make is trying to control the future. They write complicated conditions, rules about how the money should be used, who should marry who, what career choices are acceptable, how property must be managed. It comes from fear. You spent decades building something. You don't want to see it wasted. But control after death is an illusion. Life will move in directions you cannot predict. Your children will face realities you never imagined. And rigid instructions written years earlier can become suffocating chains. Instead of empowering your family, those conditions trap them inside decisions made by someone who is no longer alive to understand the consequences. It's one of the strange paradoxes of power. The more control you try to enforce after death, the more chaos you often create. Then there is the quiet poison of unequal inheritance. Parents rarely admit it openly, but they justify it in private. One child is more successful, another struggled financially, one was always obedient, another was difficult, so the parent divides the inheritance unevenly. It feels logical, practical, even fair. But siblings don't measure fairness with calculators. They measure it with emotion. The child who receives less doesn't see a financial difference. They see a lifetime judgment, a silent statement about worth, about love, about who mattered more. And once that feeling enters the family, it rarely disappears. You may think you are rewarding responsibility, but what your children might hear is something very different. I loved you less. Money amplifies that message, even if you never intended it. There is another dangerous habit people bring into their wills: confession. They treat the document like a final letter, a place to reveal secrets, to explain old conflicts, to settle emotional scores. They write paragraphs about past disappointments, old betrayals, family tensions that were never resolved. They believe honesty will bring closure, but closure requires conversation, and conversation requires two living people. A will cannot argue back. It cannot explain itself. It cannot soften its words. So whatever you write becomes permanent, cold, unquestionable. Your last voice becomes a monologue delivered to people who cannot respond. And sometimes that monologue wounds more deeply than silence ever could. Most people underestimate how fragile family relationships really are. You see them at birthdays, at weddings, at holidays, everyone smiling, everyone behaving politely. But beneath those smiles, there are layers of history, old rivalries between siblings, unspoken comparisons, quiet feelings of neglect, moments from childhood that were never forgotten. Inheritance pours gasoline on those hidden fires. Suddenly every memory gets reinterpreted. Every decision becomes evidence. Every dollar becomes symbolic. And the truth surfaces. Many families were never as stable as they looked. Another mistake hides behind good intentions. People name the wrong executor. They choose someone they trust emotionally. A loyal friend, a favorite child, a relative who seems responsible. But being trustworthy and being capable are not the same thing. Managing an estate can be complex. Legal paperwork, financial decisions, tax responsibilities, conflicts between family members, pressure from people who want more than their share. The person you appoint will carry enormous weight, and if they are not emotionally strong or practically skilled, that responsibility can crush them. Even worse, it can turn them into the villain of the story, because when someone controls the process, suspicion always follows. People begin questioning motives. They start searching for hidden advantages. What you intended as a gesture of trust becomes a source of distrust. There is also a deeper lesson hidden in all of this. Something uncomfortable about human nature. Most people spend their lives believing their family bonds are stronger than they really are. They trust love to overcome money. They trust blood to overcome ego. But the truth is harder. Money doesn't create conflict. It reveals it. It magnifies what already exists beneath the surface. If resentment was there before, inheritance will expose it. If jealousy existed quietly for years, it will become louder. If siblings already compared themselves to each other, wealth distribution will turn that comparison into a competition. This is why so many families fall apart after someone dies. Not because the will was wrong, but because the relationships were never as stable as everyone pretended. Another dangerous thing people place inside a will is property that carries emotional history. The family home, the land that holds childhood memories, the business that defined a parent's identity. These things are rarely just assets. They are symbols, and symbols are powerful. If one child inherits the home, the others may feel like they lost more than a building. They feel like they lost their place in the family story. If one sibling controls the business, the others may feel excluded from the legacy. Even when the financial value is equal, the emotional value rarely is, and emotions are what people actually fight over. There is also a psychological trap most people never notice. They assume their will represents their final act of wisdom, a carefully considered plan. But many wills are written during moments of frustration, moments of fear, moments when relationships are strained. People rarely update them after emotions calm down. So years later, a document created during a temporary conflict becomes a permanent instruction, and the consequences unfold long after the emotions that inspired it have faded. This is why maturity matters. Writing a will is not just a legal task, it is a psychological one. It requires brutal honesty about your family, about their strengths, their weaknesses, their hidden rivalries. It requires understanding that death will remove the only person who could mediate conflict, you. Once you are gone, there is no referee, no explanation, no ability to clarify what you meant. All that remains is paper, and paper cannot repair relationships. There is also something deeper at stake, your identity. People believe their legacy is measured by what they leave behind. Money, property, assets. But legacy is not measured by wealth. It is measured by what your family becomes after you are gone. Do they remain united, or do they drift into silence? Do they remember you with gratitude, or with quiet resentment? Your will plays a role in that outcome, more than most people realize. The most powerful inheritance you can leave is clarity, fairness that feels emotionally understandable, decisions that reduce tension instead of creating it. But that requires humility. It requires accepting that you cannot solve every problem from beyond the grave. Sometimes the wisest choice is simplicity, not control, not punishment, not emotional speeches written in legal documents, just clear decisions that minimize conflict, because here is the uncomfortable truth most people avoid. After you die, your family will reveal who they really are. Your will not change their character. It will only test it. And if the document you leave behind amplifies their worst instincts, the consequences will echo for decades. The strange thing about legacy is that it doesn't belong to you. Not really. Once you are gone, your story is carried by the people who remain. Their memories become your reputation. Their relationships become your final chapter. If your will divides them, that division becomes part of your legacy, and no amount of money can repair that. So before you write a single line in that document, ask yourself a harder question, not how to distribute your assets, but how your decisions will shape the people who survive you, because wealth disappears, property changes hands, businesses close, but the emotional consequences of your choices can last generations, and once the document is signed, once your voice disappears from the room, those consequences cannot be revised. A will is often described as a final act of love, but love without wisdom can still cause damage, and damage delivered from the grave is permanent. In the end, the most dangerous thing you can leave inside your will is not a specific asset. It is unresolved emotion, because money fades, property decays, but resentment passed from one generation to the next can survive far longer than any fortune. And if that becomes your final legacy, then everything you built in life will feel smaller than you imagined.